Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 111 of 2-Minute Talk Tips, the podcast that opens with a practical public speaking tip in the first 2 minutes before getting into a deeper discussion about public speaking. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Julia Wojnar.
The one actionable tip I would say is to start with getting clear on that big idea, and in order to do that, ask yourself that question of what is the one biggest takeaway that you want your audience to get out of your topic. And you can help come to that through that brain dumping exercise to take all of the information that's floating around in your head related to your topic, all of the stories, all the details that you know that are related to it, and just get it out of your head, dump it all onto a piece of paper. And then from there, when you review that, you can figure out and extract what's important and what supports that big idea, and then what can be thrown out.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Julia Wojnar. Welcome back. As Amy Lyle told us a couple weeks ago, there is a lot of performance in public speaking, so having a theater background can be really helpful. In the theater, you have to know your part and how your role fits into the rest of the show. You have to know your lines, and you have to be rehearsed. Speaking is similar. You have to know your purpose. Why are you speaking? What is your role in this meeting or event? What is the purpose of your talk in the large event or conference? What are you meant to accomplish by being there? You see, you have to be prepared and rehearsed to be effective. Unlike theater, you don't have to have your talk memorized word for word, but you do need to know your content. And that's what the prep work is all about. Today's guest, Julia Wojnar, comes from a theater background, which helps her be an effective public speaking coach through her company, Unleash Your Presence. In this conversation, we talk about theater, working through nerves, identifying your purpose, and speaking in different cultures. We also reference Billy Mays, the iconic TV pitchman from the 90s and early 2000s. If you don't know who that is, you can check out the show notes over at 2minutetalktips.com/Julia to see him in action. Julia also talks about an acting exercise called Crazy Eights. You can see Julia demonstrate that technique also at 2minutetalktips.com/Julia. Julia Wojnar is the founder of Unleash Your Presence, where she develops professionals' resilience, speaking, and communication skills to tackle tough decisions and express their ideas clearly and confidently. Nowadays, she speaks and delivers live and virtual trainings to help her clients bridge the gap between their brilliant idea and their ability to communicate it powerfully. Julia also has a couple of great promotions available to corporate managers or other speakers, and we'll talk about more of those towards the end of the conversation, so stick around through the whole thing. Now, let's meet Julia. Julia, thank you so much for joining us on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is, looking over your background and the things that you're doing now and the stuff you've got on the Unleash Your Presence website. You've got some really exciting things that have happened and that are continuing to happen. But let's go ahead and start with, sort of where it all begins. What was your earliest experience with public speaking?
Yes, well, it's interesting, Bill. My earliest experience, I can think all the way back with speaking, actually started for me with performance. And doing theater, whether that be with musicals or plays, was a passion of mine that started very young. So the first time I was ever on stage was performing in the musical The Wiz when I was 8 years old. And that just absolutely started my passion and my love for the theater. And so that is something that I continued throughout my childhood and really since then. But my very earliest memory of taking the stage was at that age performing.
That's awesome. Was that like a school production or more of a community theater type of thing?
Yeah, I was in a community theater group, so that was a production that they put on there.
You know, those early experiences are just so valuable in helping folks get, develop that comfort level with the stage from an early time before we're afraid of everything. When we're younger, little kids, we're just not afraid.
Absolutely. And, Bill, it was actually a really pivotal moment for me as young as I was, because I can remember before that as a little kid being really shy and sort of being afraid to put myself out there and talk to people that I didn't know that well. And then I felt like once I was able to perform on stage and really get that reaction and engagement from the audience, that I realized that I had a lot more power within me, and that being able to put myself out there and connect with people was a really powerful way to be.
So, and that's great, because it means you've really been able to love the stage all your life. So when you take a stage today, or before you get on stage today, and obviously presenting is a little bit different from theater, but what are you typically doing in that 5 minutes before you get on stage?
What I like to do, Bill, is I think that I like to sort of just get myself in the mindset for speaking. And so with that, one thing that I always talk to my clients about when they're feeling those jitters before they get on stage, which is totally natural, is other than, taking a deep breath and really just centering yourself, to remember why you're there. And I always like to remind myself of the value that I'm bringing to the audience, and really putting myself in the mindset of service, I think, is the biggest way to really get yourself in the right frame of mind to serve that audience, and to be able to transform any fears that you may have around speaking, or any nerves that may be feeling really strong, into really an excitement and a passion that you can bring to being a more engaging speaker.
Do you do that through repeating phrases, or is there a technique to do that? Or
yeah,
a habit?
As I said, I think that the first thing is again, keeping yourself in that mindset of service. And then what I do is I just like to do some breathing techniques and really get myself centered. And actually on my website, I have a video that I posted of a little kind of exercise that I did, which actually I learned from the acting world, which it's called Crazy Eights. And it's basically just an exercise where you're kind of shaking out your arms and legs and counting down from 8 to 1. And again, there's a video on my website that folks can see a demonstration of that. But what that does is it really gets you back into your body and just get your blood flowing, so that rather than feeling like it's stagnant and those nerves are perhaps getting to you, that it just gets that excitement flowing through you, so that you're able to better channel that energy.
Sort of burn off some of that excess physical energy that's really not going anywhere unless you do something with it.
Absolutely.
So obviously that's a nice exercise to pull over from theater. How else has theater informed your speaking today?
Yeah, well, I think, Bill, I feel really blessed actually to have discovered my love for performance in the theater at such a young age, because it wasn't until I was speaking and really presenting a lot more beginning in my college years when I realized that a lot of the delivery techniques and stagecraft techniques that you learn in theater can also be applied to speaking, because speaking really is a performance if you're doing it well, especially if you're addressing a big group, that other than, the message that you're delivering, people really also want to be entertained. And in order to engage the audience and to really keep them focused on your message, there has to be that element of engaging them and really getting them involved in your message. And so I feel really lucky to have discovered the theater, because through that I learned stagecraft techniques that I bring to my speaking and also to working with clients to help them take their message from simply a delivery that may come across, as a lecture or just more of a straightforward presentation to really amplify their own presence so that they're able to deliver in a much more engaging way and really make that connection with their audience.
That's awesome because you got to give them a reason to come see you and come be in that room or be on that webinar instead of just reading the text of what you were going to say.
Absolutely.
So how did you make the transition or why did you make the transition from theater to broader speaking, or more specifically, why did you add speaking as sort of your core business instead of, pursuing acting?
Yeah, well, it's actually a decision that I made beginning with in my college years. I studied communications. And so through that degree, I was actually presenting quite a bit on all different kinds of topics and different business things that I would have to go and research and then present on. And I realized that as much as I love theater, I didn't feel that acting as a profession was quite the route that I wanted to take, and really the lifestyle of, auditioning and trying to get cast in different shows or productions. But I realized that I could take my love for the theater and bring that into speaking by actually delivering messages that inspired and also educated people. And again, as much as I love the art of the theater, it is very specialized. And being from New York, I got an appreciation for Broadway and the crafts that they do there. But in thinking about speaking, there's a much broader application to speaking. And I think it's something that you can really apply to the business world and all sorts of different industries. So I just saw speaking as a way to get that same love that I had for the stage through performing, but to be able to apply it in a way that was able to impact a larger amount of people.
And can impact your audience's lives in a more direct way than you can. And I don't mean it to sound derisively when I say this, but you can impact them more directly than you can in, through the power of art.
Right. Absolutely.
So you've been able to take this experience and speak not only domestically, but, really at events around the world, which is amazing. The opportunities that once you can speak comfortably and get in front of a stage and get in front of an audience and share a message and work on transforming lives, the doors that it opens can be just fantastic. Do you speak differently on an international stage versus a domestic one? Are there additional things you have to do, whether due to language or culture or just the presence of being out of the country?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bill. And I think that there are definitely nuances to speaking to different audiences. And I really liken it to this idea of, thinking about the audience that you're serving. And as with any part of the preparation process of researching and really preparing your talk for a particular audience, is keeping in mind what their needs are. And so I think the biggest difference that I find in speaking abroad versus at home would be just a bit of cultural differences. And in sort of a broad generalization, I would say that there is definitely a lot more of the business culture in other countries. For example, in Europe, and I've also spoken in some places in Asia, can be a lot more understated than we have in the US. So some of the sort of over-the-top, very exuberant styles that you might see speakers have in the States might not be received as well in these other countries. And it might be taken as sort of a bit of arrogance to be so over-the-top. And so while you need a bit of that with speaking, I think it's something to keep in mind that, humility is very much a big value in a lot of cultures across Asia and even in different countries in Europe. I think that they find sometimes that's something that the cultures really value. And so definitely, being confident in your message, but not so over the top that it turns people off. So I think I do maybe tend to tone things down a little bit more when I'm speaking to those audiences, and remembering that's something that they really value. And again, also just little differences that I've seen, such as in speaking in Asian countries where, community is such a big part of the culture. And so they might not take as well to somebody that really, stands out so much from the dominant culture. So just keeping in mind what that culture values and trying to, adapt your message to be respectful and mindful of that.
So overseas, it's better not to go into full-on Billy Mays mode.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I think what's important about that, too, is that it's helpful for folks outside the U.S. who happen to be coming to the U.S. to speak to recognize that maybe it's going to be more effective for them to dial up the natural tendencies for a primarily U.S. audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that it kind of goes in the reverse as well. If you have someone, say, coming from Asia to the U.S., then that East-West difference and what they might be used to is a lot different. So they might have to almost amplify themselves more to really connect with that American audience.
So, you obviously got all this great experience, and then you went ahead and you decided and you became a speaking coach. So why did you make that decision? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Bill. I think that I like to say that my sort of entrepreneurial journey, if you will, began before I really knew what that even looks like. And the funny thing is that I started my business after I'd been fired from a job. And that really just
always great incentive.
Yes. But it really changed my whole perspective on thinking about my life in a broader sense and this idea of lifestyle design. And so I wanted to be able to, in traveling, incorporating that and being able to have a bit more flexibility to work for myself. And really early on, I started working with a business coach, and it was a great lesson that I learned. I've worked with several coaches since then and continued to educate myself through various online courses and trainings to invest in my business education. And that was a big learning, is the importance of investing in yourself. And it was really through working with that coach that I realized that communications, and speaking being a part of that, but really communications and my background in that was something that I had a passion for and had already built some skills in. And when it came to speaking, I worked with various clients who may have been much more advanced than I was in the world of business, but when it came to public speaking, they were really just beginning because it's not something that they may have embraced before or had as much experience doing. So I really focused there on realizing that was my passion, my skill set, and that I could taking all of the learnings that I had from the world of theater and all that I learned about being on stage and apply that to the business world and helping people to really make their message come alive.
And that's really cool. I think one of the things that's really interesting that you mentioned there is in talking about how these are a lot of folks who can be very successful in business, but they don't necessarily have these skills. I think a lot of times we look at somebody who is successful, who is very good at what they do, and we automatically think they're going to be very good at everything that they do, when in reality, they just have the skills that they've developed for the stuff that they live and breathe every day, and it becomes obvious to them. Whereas those of us who are speaking a lot, the basic skills and even the most basic simple stuff of public speaking, we live and breathe it every day, and so it seems so simple to us, but it's not simple and obvious to them, just as what they're expert at isn't necessarily as obvious to us. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much value in there and why, you don't have to be a CEO to coach CEOs.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bill.
As you're working with these folks, what's the biggest mistake you see business professionals making when they take a stage?
Yes, I love this question, Bill. And the biggest thing that I see business professionals make, sort of that biggest mistake when they take the stage is being a bit all over the place and lacking what I like to call the big idea. So the big idea is really, to put it in a nutshell, the main theme or point of what you're talking about. And so a question that I always like to ask my clients to help them think about this is, if you're delivering a presentation, and no matter what length of time it is, if your audience could walk away from that and only remember one thing about what you said, what would you want that main takeaway to be? And when they get really clear on that, that's the big idea that their whole presentation revolves around. So I find that a lot of business professionals take the importance of that for granted, or maybe don't think about that ahead of time. And so they may, take the stage or go and give their presentation, and they want to cover so many different things that they wind up being scattered in delivering their message. And so I think it's really important for them to give thought to and establish that big idea beforehand, so that in preparing their speech and also delivering it, they make sure that they're staying on topic and they're staying on their message. And that way the audience is really getting a clear message that they can walk away with those clear takeaways.
What's really interesting about that is that it really gets to the point that the biggest mistake these folks are making on stage is one that they've actually made before getting on the stage, and not doing the prep and not doing that work to define their message, define their big idea, and to really position themselves for success.
Yeah, it's a great point, Bill. And it's something that I'm sure you know from speaking as well. When I'm speaking, when any of our clients are speaking, it's something that I always keep in mind is how important that prep is, even if you're a very experienced speaker, because you may be speaking to a new audience, or you may have little slight differences in what you're presenting to that particular audience that you want to make sure really lands with them. So I always say, no matter how experienced you are, dedicating some real time to rehearsal and prep prior to giving that presentation is just going to make that difference from taking it from being okay to really great and impactful.
All-star athletes aren't skipping practice and drills.
Exactly. That's a great point.
So you've named your organization Unleash Your Presence. It's a great name. And what do you mean by that?
Well, thank you. It certainly was not an easy task to come to that name. But I will say that the idea kind of came to me as I was thinking about what the real purpose and desire of people who are speaking is. And I think in working with business professionals, even if they're not a professional speaker per se, or speaking is only part of what they do, that ultimately these folks really want to be able to go on stage and have that stage presence. And again, that's something that I think that great actors or great performers do even if you think about going to a concert of your favorite musician and just the amount of presence that they have to really connect with their audience and deliver a really great show, that's the same kind of presence that you want to have as a speaker. And I truly believe that everybody has that capacity or that ability within them to develop that stage presence. Sometimes it's just a matter of bringing it out of them and learning the skills to amplify their natural presence so that you can still be yourself on stage, but really just be the best version of yourself for that audience.
Right. So how do you help people pull that out of themselves if they've never felt that way before?
Yeah, I think the big thing that really separates speaking from, say, your everyday conversations or just talking to someone one-on-one, every day, is the platform of that stage, right? So depending on the size of the stage, and this is even amplified even more, the more people that you have in the room, the more that you almost have to amplify yourself in order to get the message across. And I like to think about it as if standing on a stage, you want to be able to reach the person, not just with your volume, of course, but to really get through to the person sitting all the way back in that back row. And so not just the folks who are right there in front of you, but in thinking about those folks all the way back. In order to reach them, you're going to have to really be a bit bigger than you might normally in your everyday speech. So whether that, obviously, again, in volume, if you're using a mic, that helps, but amplifying your voice and amplifying even your movement a bit more to a level that you might not do in your everyday life, but it makes it so that when that person's sitting all the way in the back of the room, they're able to really take in everything that you're saying, just as the people sitting in the front are. So I think about really just taking how you are naturally and almost bumping that up a little bit and adding some extra energy to it so that it comes across as totally natural for the folks who are way there in the back of the room.
It's almost like as big and comical as you think you are being, you're not being big enough usually.
Absolutely. And it is something that I think that people just have to get accustomed to when they're not used to speaking in front of large groups, is again thinking about that person in the back of the room. You don't seem like you're being comical or over the top. It just comes across as natural because there's a lot more distance than you would have with a smaller group or just being one-on-one with someone in everyday conversation.
Right. And of course, one of the things that does help with that presence is, as you talked about already, the big idea. Because when it's your big idea and it's something that you care about, that helps you become more animated. So, I mean, how do you help folks, figure out their big idea and really craft that message? What kind of work do they need to do that?
Yeah, so what I like to do with my clients, Bill, is think about this in terms of a 3-phase process of kind of developing your speech, if you will. And I call this the 3 phases of that are the discovery phase, the writing phase, and then delivery. And so in that first phase of discovery, that's really the discovery of your big idea, where we're going through and almost brain dumping all of the different ideas that are related to the topic that you're talking about. And then again, coming back to that big question that we talked about earlier of if your audience could only walk away with one main takeaway from your presentation, what would you want that to be? And when we get really clear on that, then we can go back and figure out what details and what stories and the pieces that are essential to that big idea that we want to keep there and what is just extraneous that we can throw out. So that's the first phase, is that discovery phase. And then once we've got that down and gotten really clear on our big idea, then we move into the writing phase. And there's actually particular speech writing frameworks, if you will, that have been proven really effective time after time that I teach my clients. And they can actually be quite simple once you explain them, but it's something that you don't always think about when you're organizing your speech. And it's just a way to make sure that you are keeping focus with your big idea and that everything is presented in a way that helps people retain the information. So there's actually 7 different frameworks that are used in speech writing. They're also appearing in movies, if you've seen particular story arcs, or even in books. And it's just ways to structure the information so that people are better able to absorb it and retain it afterwards. And so we use those in the writing process to help them make sure that their big idea is coming across clearly and that the message is staying focused. And then finally, in that third phase of delivery, we're working with them to figure out how their natural style is. And that starts with a bit of an assessment where I look at how their stage presence and their delivery is currently, and then what areas they may be missing or what areas can be improved upon in order to amplify them to that next level. So again, I break that down into those three main phases of the process of preparing for that speech as the discovery process of discovering your big idea, writing it using those core frameworks, and then the delivery, incorporating those stagecraft and storytelling techniques to take you from being an okay speaker to a really memorable speaker.
Fantastic. And one of the things I really like about the idea of frameworks is that, you know, when you can work within a framework, well, you've got a system, and anytime you're doing the same thing a lot, the more of a system you have, the better you're going to be. But these frameworks that are already a part of culture mean that when you're using that framework, your audience already knows how to listen to you. Whereas if you don't use any kind of framework and just kind of go random, your audience, before they can retain your material or learn what you're trying to teach them, they have to figure out how to learn from you. And that puts an extra hurdle in the way of having the impact you want to have.
Absolutely, Bill. And I think it's so critical because anybody who's done any kind of educating knows this. Sometimes we take for granted if we're teaching something that is very second nature to us, that to someone who may be hearing your information or your content for the first time, or it's brand new to them, that it takes some time and attention for them to really absorb that and to retain what you're saying. And so using those frameworks really helps people to, again, help in that process of absorbing what you're saying and being able to remember your key takeaways.
That is fantastic. So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Thanks so much, Bill. Well, I have actually created a special link just for your listeners with some special resources, and that is bit.ly, bit.ly/UIP Talk Tips.
Hey, Bill just jumping in here after the fact to let you know we changed that link due to some Bitly challenges we were having. The link is now 2minutetalktips.com/UYP Top Tips. That's 2minutetalktips.com/UYP for Unleash Your Presence Top Tips. Or just visit 2minutetalktips.com/Julia for that link and many more.
And on that page, your listeners can access a complimentary copy of my corporate communications checklist, and that'll give them some helpful tips to get started for business professionals who may be speaking now or may just be looking to improve their communication in their day-to-day with their teams. That'll give them some really great places to start. And we also have on there a link to a video training series that I've put together that really goes over the most common speaking questions that I get all the time and my answers to those to help folks overcome those very common challenges. And of course, there's a link there to learn more about my programs and reach out to me if you have any questions and would like to get in touch about how to unleash your own presence and become a better speaker.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us here this week. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Bill. It's been a pleasure.
You can find all the links Julia mentioned over at 2minutetalktips.com/Julia. Julia takes a nice practical approach to her training, from the 3 phases of crafting a talk to the 7 frameworks for writing it to the work involved in identifying your big why. It's a process that can be duplicated, and that means it's one you can teach and it's one you can learn. Julia also has a special deal for corporate managers right now. If you're a corporate manager who's ready to set the stage to lead your team with clarity and conviction, then Julia has an online course which may be just what you need. And she'll make module 1 of this 8-module series available for free to the first 5 companies that qualify. For information and to see if you qualify, send an email to Julia over at unleashyourpresence.com. So check out Julia's corporate communications checklist at 2minutetalktips.com/UYP Top Tips, or head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/Julia for that link, unleash your presence, and more from Julia Wojnar. Subscribe to 2-Minute Talk Tips in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.